Tim Park, so welcome at the DAI Festival.
Thank you.
Very happy you're here.
And I'm happy to be here.
You've been spending this week in Heidelberg as you're taking part in the DAI project with the question Science as Religion. And for this you are doing a kind of internship in various science institutions to find out how strongly nowadays the natural sciences take over the traditional role of religion. As far as meaningfulness and orientation are concerned, but also the creation of values and norms for society. And you will finally write a literary text on your findings and your thoughts.
Let's hope so. Yeah.
Oh, okay. We're looking forward to it already.
Thank you.
My question is, what made you curious to take part in this project?
Well, for some time I've been thinking about writing a small book about attitudes to consciousness, different scientific positions and philosophical positions about consciousness, and how much those positions affect the way we act and think about things. So what are the implications of those positions? And in a certain sense, it's clear there, for example, the position that all our consciousness and perception is inside the brain, and the world is very different from the world as we experience it.
Like
and so the some scientists will say, for example, there is no colour in the world, all the colour is in your head. And so the scientist becomes a sort of person who has to mediate between your very naive imagination of what the world is and him who really knows what the world is. And this began to interest me because the scientist then begins to establish, begins to have a certain power to tell you what the nature of reality is. And it's very interesting that people accept this because there are all kinds of objections to this. So when I was invited to come to Heidelberg to talk to some people about this kind of thing, it seemed an opportunity that would fit in with what I was already thinking about. And in fact, I've had some very useful talks here with people.
And probably some of your thoughts are already mentioned in your book, Teach Us How to Sit, I think.
Teach Us to Sit Still. Yeah. Well, yes and no. In Teach Us to Sit Still, I was very interested, in the question of embodiment. The way in the West we tend to separate ourselves from our bodies.
We have this dualism,
and we tend to think of ourselves as our minds rather than ourselves as our bodies. And certainly for somebody like me, there is a kind of obsessive verbal mental life. Which might be quite destructive at the level of health and so on. So I did explore that, but it's not quite the same as thinking about the nature of consciousness and and it's how far it is genuinely inside the head or whether something else is happening. So yes, there was obviously some connection with that, but particularly in, for example, I was talking to Professor Fuchs, who's very much
Thomas Fuchs,
a psychologist, philosopher, who's thinking about the nature of embodiment and consciousness as a form of enactivism. That is, the world becomes conscious insofar as we act in relation to it. So yeah, there was some connection there for sure. Yeah.
So you had talked to scientists in the field of developmental psychology and early childhood psychology, then psychotherapy and also neurobiology, and all in the context together. What exactly drew you to these disciplines?
In all the people I spoke to here, Sabine Power and Hannah Monnier and Thomas Fuchs, are all people that behind their work there is the same consideration of how experience imprints itself, if you want, on the mind, and this changes the nature of future experience and changes the nature of the brain. So in all their work there is a question of the brain's plasticity and what the brain is doing in relation to experience, what the body is doing. And of course, for example, Hannah Monnier is looking at the whole question of how experience is transformed into memory.
Memory,
and
exactly,
actually trying to look at the cells moving around the neurons when they fire in relation to a particular movement in space, and then how a mouse might then pass that from the hippocampus to the outer cortex. Totally fascinating.
Yeah. It's incredible what we're just discovering in the brain at the moment, isn't it?
Well, it kind of isn't. It isn't. I mean, in the one hand, it's simply extraordinary, the sort of micro technology that makes it possible to see certain things. But then it's also extremely interesting about how much, like, for example, if I have these 4 electrodes in a mouse's head and I let him go round and round in a cage for 2 hours, and I see that every time he's in this point of the cage, this particular cell this neuron fires. Okay, so what I know is that there is something in relation to being in that space that has a particular relation to a particular place in the brain. But I don't really know anything else. I don't know if the experience of being in that place is actually coded in that thing, or simply if when this happens, that also happens, but what is the relationship between them is very complex, I think. So it's both amazing and also, and this is one of the things that I'm most interested in, it does not seem that neuroscience, in the way it's proceeding by analysing all the connections in the brain, it does not seem likely that it will say anything at the end about the subjective experience of consciousness. So one thing that I find curious is the way, as a society, we've delegated to neuroscience the exploration of really the deepest questions. And at the same time, we seem quite happy that actually neuroscience is giving us all kinds of fascinating results.
A lot of data.
But a lot of data.
Yeah.
But in terms of ideas, everything remains a mystery. And I think actually people are quite happy with that. So it's as if we'd ask somebody to solve a problem we don't really want to be solved. I think there's, and obviously some neuroscientists, certainly not people like Hannah Monia, who is totally focused on the facts and the work. But there are other neuroscientists, like Christoph Koch would be an example, who have sort of stepped very boldly into the philosophical field and really accepted an invitation that society has given them to have neuroscience explain the world. And what's interesting about that is how completely neuroscience then fails to explain the world. So.
And did I get you right that you are trying to find the bridge between the cells firing and the kind of data we have and what it tells us about conscience? I mean, we're touching big fields there, like consciousness and
I'm not imagining
soul
that I will solve this problem.
No, okay, that would be wonderful, of course, if you did, but it's a big bridge.
But I'm not a megalomaniac. I'm very interested in the vocabulary which is used to describe what is happening. For example, I'll be talking to Hannah about what's going on, and so she'll say, so this cell is telling the mouse that he is in this position. And I'll say to Hannah, but the cell is the mouse. There is no mouse to tell about being in this place. This is the experience of being in this place. And also, we don't really know if the cell is telling that. We just know that the cell is alive in relation to that being in that space. So I'm interested in the way even these factual experiments are to a certain extent coloured by a deep hypothesis that consciousness is indeed in the brain, and the way this actually conditions the way we think about our lives. But for example, the way in the West we tend to think very much that ourselves and our minds are separate from the world. And because they're separate from the world, we have a suspicion that one day it may be possible to download a brain onto a computer and not die. And
sounds a bit threatening.
It sounds threatening, but it is a kind of modern fantasy.
Yeah, it's a possibility, isn't it?
And it's a fantasy that indicates that there's a desire, still a desire for eternal life, as it were. I have a very different picture of the reality of things. So I'm interested in exploring the way the vocabulary of science creates certain conditions. I don't think science substitutes religion. In the religion has a collection of emotions and experiences and anthropological functions.
Also with frameworks of
some
acting
of
and
science,
behaving.
For example, science has certainly become a guardian of ultimate knowledge, an ultimate authority for a lot of people. So you know, the scientist says your experience of that is actually not an experience of reality, and we accept that, even though we know that there is no ultimate reality to be appealed to, because nobody actually knows what reality would be if we were not looking at it, as it were. Like, to say there's no colour in the world, what does that mean? It means we have a machine that measures, that says that colour is a collection of light rays, etc. Well, that's what colour is for us with our perceptive system. Does that mean there's no colour in the world? So who else is looking at the world in such a way that there's and so on. So these are things that I'm fascinated by, and the discussions that I had with people here were intriguing. Intriguing because what's clear is that nobody has any emphatic opinions really about these matters. That the more you actually talk to a scientist, the more doubts are raised, as it were.
Looks like it. I think Newton said this once. What we know is a drop, and what we don't know is a complete ocean. So you discover this quite quickly. Did you come across a definition of consciousness in your conversations, or is there a definition in science of consciousness? An agreed upon definition, I mean?
No, there's no
there isn't.
Definition. I mean, nor did we seek really to do that. I think in recent discussions on consciousness, the whole question of the feeling of what it feels like to be alive is
Beautiful
considered
question.
to be a crucial aspect, if you want, of consciousness, like the awareness of being alive. The mentally reasoned awareness that I can tell myself that I feel that I am alive, as it were. However, there are many definitions of consciousness. What I was really interested in was because how can you learn something new from a conversation like this? By talking to people about what they're actually doing. So, for example, Sabina Powen is analysing at what age and how a baby, 6 months, 7 months, 9 months, can begin to distinguish between different categories, not just between different faces, but this face is a female face, that face is a male face, this is an animal, this is an object. How quickly that is done, how quickly the brain responds to seeing something in such a way that if it sees it again, it needs less attention to understand the object, which means it's already recognizing it, which means that something in the head has already changed in relation to that experience. But these things are totally fascinating and interesting to talk about.
Looks like
I mean, whatever I write, I will think about after some reflection on these conversations.
To come back to the title of the project, Science and Religion, do you think that nowadays science is a threat to religion, to what we expect from religion?
Actually, no, I don't think so. I think the only threat to religion is indifference, probably.
Or fundamentalism.
I don't. Do you think fundamentalism is a threat to religion?
Could
Religion
be.
has always had fundamental. I grew up in a family of religious fundamentalists. My parents were charismatic evangelical Christians who performed exorcisms and so on. I don't think anybody need worry that religion will disappear. People have a hunger for religion. Fundamentalism grows; it doesn't shrink, and I don't think it chases other people away from religion. There is today this constant, how many times over recent years people have said to me, is sport replacing religion? Is consumerism replacing religion? There are a whole series of functions, things like belonging in a group, which was an important part of religion, explaining the ultimate things, which is an important part of religion, offering consolation, etc., etc. All of these can obviously be partly these functions can be partly carried out in other ways. But I don't think that means these other ways are substituting religion. You might say sometimes that religion has invaded the fields that were available in other ways.
Maybe these categories are coming more closely together anyway, in the way like the world is becoming more global, more complex. So maybe you have to.
Is it becoming more? I think
get
it's
a different order.
Extremely complex. Everything is permanently changing.
Changing, absolutely.
And I think the act of being scandalized or worried is an indication of a certain innocence and ingenuousness. This stuff is happening. Let's observe it and be intrigued. You know.
Be attentive.
Be attentive. Yes. Be attentive.
Looking at the years to come, what do you think will? Let's have a try. What do you think will society require from the sciences, and what from religion? Well, what it can do for people?
It seems clear to me that apart from the obvious desire that science resolve some health problem, or that science resolve the global warming problem. Science is, on the one hand, simply a problem, part of our general problem-solving obsession. So we could link it with economics and with management in general, and say, you know, when are the scientists going to solve the energy problem and so on. Obviously, science is being invited to do those things. At a higher level, it seems to me that science, and in this it does share something with religion, is occupying the space of telling us that they are looking into these things, and these things are too complicated for us, so that we can get on with our lives, and somebody else is looking at the ultimate questions, right? So I don't actually have to think, you know, what is the nature of consciousness, what's going to happen to me when I die, etc., etc., because all that is being looked at elsewhere. It's absolutely not important that science actually answer these questions. In fact, it would be extremely problematic, probably, if they did. But or even if they changed, if they make a major change in the kind of hypotheses they're offering. For example, now, if you there's a book called Conversations on Consciousness. You pick up this book, what does it show on the cover? It shows a brain. So that's it, brain consciousness, okay? Or Professor Fuchs gives me a journal in which he's written an article, studies in consciousness or something. Again, it shows a man with his brain lit up, and he's holding in his hand a brain. So science, in one way or another, has equated consciousness with the brain, even if when you talk to, say, Hannah Monia, she'll say, for heaven's sake, I don't believe that. And that has created this feeling that life is internal to our brain and somehow separate from the world, and that gives us a relationship to the world of power and agency. We are not one with the world, we're somehow separate from it, living in this brain. Where the information we receive is entirely transformed. Even the idea of information reception is an extremely dubious idea. So we have these models, these paradigms, and then science goes on busily around this paradigm. I think if science actually changed that paradigm in any radical way, you know, society would have to change a bit. And society doesn't seem nobody's eager to change, really. Nobody's eager to change.
It's always uncomfortable.
Sometimes individuals find that life is so uncomfortable that they have to change. But in general, conservatism, it usually wins. So for the moment, I expect things to go on very much as they are for the next 20, 30 years. Maybe I'm completely wrong. It's always stupid.
We'll see that.
But that's what I expect, anyway.
What do you think could give a hold to people in this world as complex as it is?
Give?
A hold or orientation.
Well, I mean, people are being orientated every day by endless newspaper articles, often in very unpleasant ways. You know, I would say that quite probably for most people, their orientation is done for them by their experiences with the media, filtered through the community and so on and so forth. Most people are entirely orientated to education, for a start, totally and scandalously takes over an individual from age 5, and by the time you come out at 25, you know, you're entirely convinced that life involves getting a job and having a career and so on and so on. Where, you know, what this has to do with human life is absolutely another question, but I would say that people are far too orientated, and the more disorientation we can have, the better it might be for everybody. You know, if everybody actually started thinking about why on earth we're doing all this stuff,
becoming active,
we might people might be slightly happier. I don't know. But.
And the very last question: what do you think can literature do for man?
Well. You asked the last question. We have a minute or two to talk about it. It's enormous. Let's just say I'm going to be talking this evening about literature as actually a form of meetings that we have with writers, where the meeting is entirely conditioned by who we are and who they are, that there's no sort of ultimate aesthetic position. I think the one thing writing can do for us then is allow really intimate meetings, really long-range meetings. We read 3, 4, 5 novels by Philip Roth, say, and we enter into somebody who has a totally different value system from ours, a different way of looking at life from ours. And so it does allow us, as it were, simply not to be trapped in the particular position that we occupy, but to have an experience of other people's positions, which is not too dangerous. I mean, meeting people can be very dangerous. Meeting authors can be quite dangerous. I mean, you know, meeting Thomas Bernhard can be a dangerous thing for some people, or meeting Thomas Hardy is another dangerous meeting. But it gives us that possibility of exploring different areas of experience in a more comfortable way, as it were. But literature is not going to save the world at all, and it is quite possible for somebody to live an entirely full life and be an extremely brilliant and wonderful person without ever reading a book. So I think the whole obsession on the part of the literary world that we have to save book reading to save the world is just an indication of weakness and is frankly nonsense. We should just be happy that books are wonderful and that we enjoy reading them. Then, you know, if other people want to read them, that's fine too. But if they don't, it doesn't mean the world is going to blow up tomorrow morning.
Thank you very much, Tim Parks.